Okay, we're going to start the workshop portion of the evening from 7 to 7:30. And so then at 7:30, we will start our regular agenda. And for workshop this evening, we have a few local laws that the city has asked us to review and share our feedback to them for. One of them having to do with, I don't know if there's a more technical name for it, drive-throughs.
I don't think there's a technical name for either one, so.
And then there's some zoning map changes we want to discuss. So are you going to start us off?
Sure. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Eeny, meeny. You want to go?
Zoning map changes.
Len says
There you
zoning
go.
map.
Len got it.
That's the easy one.
We got to start off gently.
Let's ease our
Ease
way
our
in.
way into the meeting. Okay, so this is a local law that was referred from the City Council to the Planning Board for its recommendations and review. This local law would amend the city's zoning map with respect to the parcels at 1 East Main Street, so that's for all of the condo units plus the common area at 1 East Main Street, to rezone it from the LI district, the light industrial district, to the CMS district. This was brought up by former building inspector Bruce Flower on one of his last days in office with the City of Beacon. He made a recommendation to Chris White, city administrator, for the rezoning of 1 East Main Street along with 7 East Main and Churchill, the Churchill parking lot owned by the city, from LI to CMS. And some of the reasons that he gave are in the memo, which is in your materials on the agenda. But generally, that area is kind of more dominated by retail and restaurant type uses that you see in the CMS district versus the light industrial uses that you would see elsewhere in the city.
Did
So
it say that the restaurant uses were actually prohibited in LI too? So they were like,
Food preparation is prohibited. I don't think restaurant per se is prohibited, if I recall.
but there was a mismatch even though on top of the fact that it seems like it's more suited to CMS.
Yeah, actually,
yeah,
the
restaurant and coffee house is prohibited in the
So
LI.
you have
Correct.
Oh,
prohibited.
restaurant is, okay, I do
Yeah.
coffee.
So
Prohibited
that's
in
actually
LI.
prohibited where they are, which doesn't make sense. So that's a good reason, sort of.
Yeah, so the local law that has been presented would only be for 1 East Main. The city council decided not to include 7 East Main, which is the Hudson Brewery, and its own parking lot within the scope of this local law. So it would just be that 1 East Main area. You're going to ask why?
Yeah, exactly. You can see my mouth
Right.
forming the question, why?
Which is what I asked as well earlier today. And one of the reasons is that the owner of the Hudson Brewery was not in favor of rezoning to the CMS district based on his belief that it would limit his uses there.
Would it in fact be more restrictive?
I don't know. I didn't look into his objection, but the city council didn't include it, so that's not part of the
So can you
referral.
continue to
So
do food
just-
preparation
yeah.
as a-
So, yeah, that use would not, the Hudson Brewery lot would not be affected by this. It would continue as it has.
And it would be an accessory use, if he has food trucks or whatever he does now. Those would not be prohibited.
I'm saying if they're prohibited, then how does it
Nothing would
continue?
change. So whatever he's doing now,
Pre-existing non-conforming use.
well, I don't think that it is,
It's
no.
not pre-existing.
No, his
Well,
use
it'd
is
be- It would be
conforming.
pre-existing to a zoning change that
Yeah.
made it illegal.
I don't know that it would be made illegal because breweries are allowed in the CMS district.
Or no?
So I think his use was
Right, but-
approved at a time when breweries didn't exist in the code. So his use may have been classified at the time as like more of a manufacturing industrial use, which would not be permitted in CMS. But
Right. So he
regardless,
was-
breweries are permitted in
But he's
CMS.
brewing quite a bit and selling it elsewhere, so would that be more of a manufacturing than?
Possibly. Again, this is not something that I looked into for the purposes of the referral because it wasn't included. Yeah.
But it also,
selling food, which is prohibited in light industrial, right?
He may not be himself. I think he has food trucks.
He
No, it's
does.
basically an
Yeah, yeah.
accessory use, which,
Yeah.
with regard to the other referral we got,
Yeah.
was, we'll discuss that later
Yeah.
on. But Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think the city council is looking to you as far as your recommendations on whether it makes sense to rezone 1 East Main from LI to the CMS district.
So I took a look at this at some length, and for what it's
Okay.
worth, I've spent a fair amount of time over the years contemplating changes to, with the creation of new zoning districts and changes.
Yeah.
If you look at the map, sorry. If you look at the zoning map, adjacent to the parcel to the south, adjacent to the Hudson Valley Brewery and 1 East Main parcel, is another repurposed industrial building. That's in GB. If you hop 1 or 2 parcels up, you hit, how am I not remembering this? Roundhouse, thank you, which is also a GB, also repurposed industrial. First, looking at other areas on the map that are LI, the current usage of the parcels we're talking about doesn't match up very well.
Yep.
It looks to me like it matches up a lot better with GB. One thing I did, and this is coming at it from the rationale of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, the reality is the two exigencies, or I don't know about exigencies, but issues that led Bruce to be raising this are 1 East Main is occupied by a multifamily dwelling and, among other things, a coffee shop, which are both prohibited LI uses. Both of those would be permitted uses in GB. Now, what's significant is, this is a spreadsheet I did in 15 minutes before the meeting, so I'm not guaranteeing this is 100% correct. I think it's 100% correct. In terms of permitted uses, whether things are permitted, forbidden, or special permit, changing from LI to GB changes 8 uses. Everything else stays the same. 2 of those uses are the ones I just mentioned. Changing to CMS changes 22 of the uses. I think another thing that happens is the dimensional requirements on lots change, and the dimensional requirements that are in CMS are really more intended for buildings that are actually adjacent to Main Street, not separated by a railroad track where you're not going to get foot traffic. That was a good 3 or 4 minutes. I'll shut up after this.
No,
when
good.
I looked at it, my solid takeaway was, yes, it makes sense to rezone this, but it would make, the only way this is coming up is if like a tornado or something destroys these buildings, and it's a matter of its ground up construction. What do we want to allow as a matter of right? In particular, I don't think we want lot line buildings as a matter of right in this location, which is one of the aspects of CMS dimensional regulations. And I said I'd shut up, but I will just say one other thing. With regard to changing use regulations, just from a planning point of view, dimensional restrictions, you can get variances from at the zoning board. The standard isn't typically that high. Use regulations, the standard that is supposed to be being applied is relatively high. You're normally not getting off them. The point being, changes to what is and is not, or what are and are not permitted uses are going to have a much bigger splash going forward than our changes to dimensional regs.
Yeah. No, that's super helpful, so,
What about the
thank you.
design guidelines?
You wouldn't have the CMS design guidelines, but at the same time, again, if a tornado destroys 1 East Main Street and they're building something new from the ground up, it's not going to be that analogous to what's on the rest of CMS, and we've got site plan approval anyway to put some restraints in there, so.
Yeah. No, I definitely think ahead to just that eventuality, and, a degree of consistency, which you're sort of talking about as well, within that area. That's, So, so I don't know necessarily where to take it then, right? I just wonder if there is... Yeah, so Bruce made this recommendation just based on his observations that there is some inconsistencies relative to this specific site, right?
Yeah.
And of course, you raised a very good point, David. about why then other areas wouldn't be considered, even if specific owners don't necessarily like the idea? Or is it better to leave well enough alone? Yeah, so more discussion.
I mean,
Thoughts?
just a little bit of background. These, when we were doing the Fishkill Creek rezoning study, these were the properties that had active development proposals that were under consideration, right? So the Roundhouse property had been a long time span application process with various proposals on it that were being encouraged by the city because not much else was happening,
Yeah.
right? And everyone was very anxious to, there were many people in the city that were anxious to start the gentrification at that time. This is many years ago. And this sort of One East Main property was also under active, there were multiple, some of which proposals, some of which didn't succeed. I also know that just my experience was that I had advocated during some of that early rezoning process to retain industrial and other uses in the city, which there was a lot of skepticism about. And when this was used as a light industrial use, I remember feeling like really good about it because it was like having a diverse economic base in this town was something that would sort of prove the case. It was something that was possible here. So I support the idea of maintaining the light industrial for that zone, right? Because it sort of protects that unique sort of use in a more diverse pattern of development, right? Where some industrial uses can be by commercial uses and residential uses in that way that cities used to develop that was a lot more interesting and sort of jigsaw patterns of development rather than large blocks of areas that were uniformly zoned. That being said, it seems like CMS is the better option because of the design guidelines, which are sort of more, it's definitely part of the fabric of Main Street. It's a big part of what you see in your experience, you know?
I'm just curious, why did he highlight the multifamily? So the significant changes between CMS and light industrial would be multifamily dwelling. So that would bring One East Main into conformance if it were transferred to CMS. Then restaurant or coffee house, same. Right, both of those currently not permitted. So they're active under special permit for those two uses, right?
For which uses?
Multifamily dwelling and restaurant or coffee house.
The coffee shop is, there's a reason Bruce recommended that. They don't have yeah.
Because,
My
okay.
own understanding is the building got a use variance
They're-
on the
they're-
residential
right.
aspect.
They're both listed as not permitted in LI, so that would be,
Correct.
yeah, a use variance.
Now, like I said, once,
Yeah, so I mean, just from that standpoint alone, like what you're saying, what Kevin just mentioned, yeah, I mean, changing to CMS makes sense. But I am also curious then about the eventuality that you described of, you know, a new build, right? And what that means in terms of dimensional issues, because I agree with you. I think we'd have to be very careful with a parcel like that.
Just want to make sure I understand correctly, because I found your information well-reasoned, but you're saying that because of the railroad tracks separate the building footprint from Main Street, that some of the CMS requirements for having that frontage immediately on Main Street would just cause a headache if you had to put something back from scratch? Is that?
well, you couldn't have it on Main Street because there's
Yeah,
railroad
the
tracks.
railroad
there,
tracks
and
anyway, which is going to be a
bike
rail
path,
trail.
But, I
Right.
mean,
But so the
but
thing
s-
is, you'd hit
You're not
hit
going to
that-
have street traffic going from the sidewalk into stores, and the rationale of then having a bunch of buildings that have shared common walls, maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but that's sort of the presumptive development model on Main
It's
Street.
it's a similar walk-up, except you're either coming from the parking lot or you're coming off of, the East Main it's the only thing is you've got the rail, if it's a rail trail too, it's easier to walk across it, right? I mean,
I walk across that thing all the time, and
So
I'm
do I.
afraid when they make a trail, they're actually going to put a fence up so that people like me can't do that. But
yeah, that'd be a bad idea. They shouldn't, because you'd want to be able to stop your bike and get a drink at the coffee shop if you want, without undue hassle.
And I'm sure we'll have a robust discussion as the
So, I mean, were
Hudson
there
Valley
any,
Trail.
so were there any other, was that the main concern for the CMS, or were there other ones too?
Well, honestly, the biggest thing was simply this. The actual motivating factor here is, okay, it doesn't allow coffee shops, it doesn't allow multifamily dwellings.
Understood.
That's in fact what
Yes,
is
it's gotta be
there,
fixed.
and that's consistent with
Right.
current development. If we're changing to a different district, that imparts fewer use changes, and it also puts it into the same district that two very close, I would say, analogous properties are in, which just,
Roundhouse doesn't really face on to Maine, though. And I mean, because what I find persuasive about Kevin's argument is that you want to get your hands on the design standards for CMS, because if you had to build something completely new on the site of 1 East Main, facing Main Street, across the street, you've got buildings with shops. I mean, aesthetically, fabric-wise, I think you would want to be able to capture that same vibe, and then if you do CMS, then you have all those design requirements. Not that they're that robust.
Well said. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the other changes to use. Retail personal service, a bank remains permitted, office remains permitted, artist studio, art gallery, exhibit space remains permitted, funeral home becomes not permitted, where once it would have been. I see that as a,
Did
I
you,
think John
did you
Anthony's
identify?
concern is industrial or manufacturing goes from permitted to not permitted.
yeah, I was getting to that one.
Arguably, yeah.
Right
But
now,
like
they've
light
left him
and-
out of it.
Light manufacturing of stuff is, right? Like breweries, distilleries.
It is.
Workshops, food preparation, like those kinds of light industrial uses are permitted in the
Yeah.
CMS.
Bar, brew pub, microbrewery,
You-
microdistillery would be permitted.
So there are some, but not as wide of a range of industrial
Did
uses.
you identify other uses that you felt were specifically of concern in the trade-off between the two?
Well, I mean, there's a whole list of things that in various respects change. Let's see.
Social club becomes permitted. Golf course, not permitted.
Golf course isn't, yeah.
A lot of the auto-oriented
Auto-oriented.
uses, like a, vehicle sales lot, gas station, those would become
Not permitted.
Hopefully, you're not going to want those.
Yeah, well, those are generally currently special permit.
And here's workshop under industrial or assembly. You've got wholesale warehouse storage or self-storage business goes from light industrial permitted to CMS not permitted. Workshop permitted, and then industrial or manufacturing use, LI permitted, CMS not permitted. I think that makes sense.
A nursery becomes not permitted.
Horticultural nursery
Right.
permitted to. It goes from permitted to, right.
So a private school or nursery goes to not permitted.
Oh, here we are. Private tennis court or pool, parking structure becomes permitted. I'm not sure I like that. Garden, roof, or greenhouse. Where do you see nursery? Or
Oh, it's down under other.
educational?
Yeah, private school.
Private school or nursery school becomes not permitted.
Parking structure as an accessory use, however, does become a permitted use in CMS.
Permitted accessory uses, yep. Incidental to a permitted principle. But not an activity for commercial gain, okay, in a residential district. That doesn't apply here.
I mean,
The commercial-
another option too would just be to tweak the LI use regulations. I don't really know that there's any reason we need to be prohibiting coffee shops in the other areas that have that designation.
That's a fair observation.
I mean, also like the fixing the fewest things approach.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, can we,
like add multifamily, right?
Yeah, I mean,
What-
it would
To the LI district.
line up with the use, but
Yeah.
they've got it.
Hey, Jen, do you know when they're planning on taking this up for a vote?
I do not.
Do you know?
17.
This coming up. I love how they spring these things on us. Jeez.
You really want to have multifamily and light industrial?
Well, the only places that are really left after this, there's one or two tiny places off Fishkill Avenue, and then everything else is down by the river. A lot of stuff that doesn't really
For,
seem,
for LI,
yeah,
yeah.
not particularly usable. What was it?
Yeah.
We're only dealing with the one parcel.
I just
One
think
is
that if that option of like allowing multifamily and LI would require a little bit more, I think that would require some more analysis. I think that's why you're asking about timing, right? To just look a little bit more at all the LI districts, and I'm all for mixing, like moving towards more mixed-use districts. But I do feel like the CMS district does that, right? That was kind of the intent of the CMS district, was
Yep.
to allow some lighter industrial. I don't know, I wonder if it really comes down to like the definition of industrial manufacturing, right? Because that's the one big one that's permitted in LI, not permitted in CMS. So like, what are we losing between those two?
A brewery seems like a hard fit to industrial and manufacturing to me.
But again, it's its own listed use here, distinct
right.
to either heavy or even light industrial.
Which,
So yeah, I mean, I think the only thing, just to kind of summarize, because we're not going to have time for the best part of the conversation, the other local law, we'll have to do that afterwards, but is to say that, I'm still going back to this idea of what the dimensional impact is in change of district between light industrial and CMS, and then what potential full build impact that has on this particular lot. Right? I just don't know what that is. I don't think any of us do. So we don't really have enough on that specifically. When we talk only about uses, yeah, it does make sense. But what the ultimate potential looks like for that lot as CMS is not clear, and we'd rather have more information on that.
Right, I mean, we have the schedule of dimensional regulations, which we can look at.
Well, we got
but
a few
I don't know
minutes.
that the time, we have the time to really analyze.
We got 5 minutes.
there's a 1,500 square foot minimum lot size in LI. There's no minimum lot size in CMS. That's a change. There is a 20-foot side yard requirement in LI. It's 0 in CMS.
Yeah, that's
And
big.
there is 20% minimum open space in LI, but 10% in CMS. And there's some other differences here and there, but I'd say that's the high points.
What
Those
are
are
the GB?
significant.
Yeah, what
Yes,
are,
I know.
can you go through the GB regulations?
GB does not have any open space, so that's going the other way. However, it's also a 1,500 square foot minimum lot size, and it's also a 20-foot side yard requirement. So it's the dimensional restrictions are a lot closer, at least as compared with CMS.
No,
Now, like I said, from a planning point of view,
No minimum lot
it's-
size, but minimum lot area per unit. So like, that's just speaking to
I take
housing
it,
density. So there's no minimum lot size.
LI is minimum 60 wide, 100
No,
feet deep.
Oh,
GB
I thought Karen
is-
had asked about
Yeah.
GB, right? GB to CMS, neither has a minimum lot size
No, GB has a minimum lot size of 1,500
per unit,
per unit.
lot area, yeah.
There's no minimum lot width in GB, it's 100 feet in depth, it's 60 by 100 in LI, and then it's 0 by 75 in CMS.
So no minimum, you could have a 5,000 square foot lot. There's no minimum lot size, but if you're putting residential on there, you have to have 1,500 square feet per
Per unit.
unit that you're putting on there. So
Yep.
it does limit density in a way that CMS does not. Right? That's the
Yeah.
1,500, yeah.
So that's another impactful
Yeah.
I think that the comparison with the GB is more compelling. You know, I think that the broader uses allowed, given the location of the site, and should it be blown over in a hurricane, you know, the size of the lot. I think I agree about the diversity of uses and mixed use. I understand the design standards not being applied in the GB, but, you know, I think we have dealt with lots like the one on 52 across from the gas station. Like, we didn't have such strict design guidelines on that in the transitional zone, and, you know, we make the best of it.
That wasn't that great, though.
Making the best of it takes a
tough.
lot of energy.
The result was not
Well-
super thrilling.
Yeah, no, so here's
I mean,
what I
I feel
would
like the
say.
design guidelines for the CMS are, you know, it's a materiality in the direction of the windows. I mean,
I know.
It's something, it's something.
it's not a lot.
It's all about the trade-off, right? I mean, here, given that we have only a couple minutes left in our
Yeah.
workshop.
I mean, I'd rather see a diversity of uses.
Uses. Yeah, I mean, what I would say to the council respectfully is, when it comes to use, a switch from LI to GMS seems appropriate. However, it's not clear, and we would suggest you look more closely at those other issues that we just described.
Yeah, the lot setbacks are
That's
a big issue.
and density, because, you know, what I'm hearing is that there's a potential for greater density in GMS.
In
And that could-
CMS. Yeah.
In CMS.
Yeah. Mhm.
So that could be a potential issue as well. You know, unintended consequences. So for all intents and purposes, we're sharing that we believe that there is more study of this necessary before the city.
Another thing, I don't know that they've looked at the comprehensive plan, just to make sure that there's nothing in the comprehensive plan that would speak directly to, you know, to Kevin's point, you know, retaining a diversity of, you know, allowing industrial uses and a diversity of economic, you know, generators.
I think it's wise to point them
Yeah.
back to the comprehensive plan,
Yeah, just
always.
to make sure
Yeah.
that
I would be
it's not
surprised if Lee
inconsistent.
weren't thinking comprehensive plan, but
I'm sure
he
he's
he
looked
uses
at
it as his Bible.
Natalie, were you advising the city council directly, or can we have your input here?
Yeah, I'm sure the council, I could give it to both you and the council in terms of the change. Happy to look at it. I mean, I think David started a good analysis of kind of comparing the various districts and the options. Like, I will just say, you still do get a diversity of uses in the CMS. Like, it is one of the most diverse in terms of like the uses are a lot. But I think doing a little comparison, adding GB into that, right? So looking at LI
Yeah.
to CMS to GB could be a good analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of dimension and uses, not just use.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow, we did good. We landed right on 7:30.